And we're so excited to welcome our guest speakers today, Vina Holden and Teresa Harwood. I'd like to start with an introduction on them. So back in 1997, Vina was a single mom and secretary with a dream and $1,000. She rented a little house and started Selective Seconds, which grew into a thriving resale business with 20 employees and 2 locations. In 2024, after 27 successful years, Vina sold her shop with the help of her broker and now business partner, Teresa. And together they launched Small Biz Exit to help other resale shop owners get ready to sell and find the right buyers with real experience, insider knowledge, and heart. And introducing Teresa Harwood. She is a commercial real estate and business broker with over 20 years of experience, a true passion for working with small business owners. She's owned several businesses herself and grew up with an entrepreneurial dad, so she understands both the heart and the hustle behind running a business. Teresa specializes in business value assessments and marketing strategies that help owners attract the right buyers and exit on their own terms. We're so excited to have them both here today, and I'll turn things over to them.
Thank you so much for that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar on preparing to sell your resale business. I'm Vina Holden, and I've owned Selective Seconds for over 27 years before selling. I'm so excited to share with you some of my experiences and lessons I've learned throughout the process of selling my business. Whether you've poured your heart into your business for 5 years or 50, deciding to sell is one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make. It's not just a financial transition, it's an emotional journey, a strategic move, and ideally the reward for years of hard work. But here's the thing, most business owners wait too long to prepare or don't prepare at all. And then that can cost you not just money, but the legacy you've built. Today, we want to walk you through what it really means to prepare to sell your business, the practical steps, the mindset shifts, and the key things buyers are looking for. So when it comes time to sell, you're not just ready, you're in control. I tried 3 times to sell Selective Seconds before I was successful. Teresa, my business broker and now partner, helped me through that.
Thanks, Vina. Hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Harwood, and I'm a business broker and a commercial real estate agent. So I've owned my own business called Harwood Commercial Group since 2019. And as Vina shared, we paired up just last year to form Small Biz Exit to help small business owners and especially resale shops and consignment shops sell their businesses. So if I could ask you a little favor now, you don't have to put your store name or your name in the chat, but to help us get familiar with who is interested in this topic, if you could put 2 numbers in the chat, that would really help us. The first one is how many years you've owned your store. So how many years have you owned your store that you currently have? And then second, how many years from now do you anticipate you would want to sell? So that's just a little bit of market research that would help us if you don't mind. Just take a second to do that. You know, some of you might be thinking that you may not be able to sell your business other than maybe a liquidation sale. And we know that's financially and emotionally challenging. But I congratulate you on being here today. What we talk about today could set you up for a very different outcome. We have seen a lot of resale shop owners just close their business, and we want to give them all the information that we can so that they can make an informed decision when it comes to getting out of the business, whether you sell or liquidate. So our goal today is to show you how to prepare for what is likely the biggest transaction of your business life, whether you're 6 months or 6 years away from selling. The steps you take now will determine the money you walk away with and how pain-free the process can be.
So today, let's just go over the overview of what we're going to be discussing today. So we've got this broken down into 6 segments: how to set yourself up for a future sale on your terms, understanding the business value or understanding how business value is determined, what business buyers look for, getting your financial records in order, getting your physical space ready to sell, and the process of selling a business and how long that takes.
So let's start with how to set yourself up for a future sale on your terms. You know, we see already in our short time of doing this, we see too many owners wait until they're ready to walk out the door to start planning the sale. That would be like a marathon runner showing up the day of the race and just running, right? The outcome will likely not be as good as it could be if they had started preparing early. So that's one of the things that we urge is that you start preparing early. Even if it's way down the road, it's not wasted effort. Ideally, you want 12, 24 months before you put it on the market that you're preparing, that you're doing all of these things to get your business ready. That's really going to get you the best results. And then when we do list a business, there are really three big issues that we see that buyers always are looking for. And so we want to share these with you so that you'll know where to concentrate your efforts. The number one thing is financials. So a lot of us get into the business that we got into because we're passionate about the business. We may or may not be passionate about keeping track of the financials. But when it's getting time to think about selling your business, we need to really focus in on the financials because nothing will run a buyer off quicker than inconsistent financials or sloppy financial records. So that really has to be tied up. And the best way to do that is to really make sure that your taxes and your P&Ls and your balance sheets are professionally prepared. You may have been getting along fine doing them yourself for the bulk of your business ownership, but now's the time to get a professional. The other thing you want to do with your financials is to make sure you understand your financials. So if someone else is preparing them, you still need to look at them monthly and make sure that you understand what's going on, even if it's not your favorite part. But that's going to help you spot things that might throw a buyer off. The good news with your financials is you can continue to take your salary, take your owner draws, write off all the expenses that as owners of small businesses we get to write off for our taxes. That is not a bad thing. A buyer actually likes to see that you are earning money out of the business because that is exactly why they're looking at buying your business, right? So you can keep doing that. But at the same time, you'll want to be aware of what you're writing off and keep better records of what you're writing off because we will adjust those out when we advise you on what your business might be worth. So keep doing it, but keep better track, right? Maybe some of you are already keeping better track, but what we find most of the time is we just need to get really focused on that. You'll
And
also want to, oh, go ahead, Thina.
Oh, I was just going to say, well, there was a comment that you're cutting out a little bit. So
Oh,
somebody had a question. It was 24 months. You did say, what was that time frame?
12 to 24 months.
Okay.
Yes. And
And
I
and
apologize if I'm cutting out.
okay. And then I was just going to add, you should not ever stop doing business the way you currently do business. Just keep doing things the way you always do. Lean into that process of what works.
Mhm.
One of the mistakes I made in one of my attempts to sell was I got close to the finish line and I drew back on ordering some supplies and things because it was
Mhm.
costly and I didn't want to just order it all for somebody else. And it fell through. So don't ever stop doing business the way you do that works. Just keep going until
Right.
amazing. So
Yeah. Don't stop doing it. But we actually also, I'll take it the next step. We advise that you look for additional ways to add to sales. So when a buyer sees a business that's thriving and even growing, that excites them even more. So maximizing sales and cutting expenses that don't affect the business are a good idea. Um, let's talk about the second thing, and that's the owner's role. So before you sell, you'll actually want to work yourself out of a job because if you are the business, we're not going to sell you. So that's going to hurt the value of the business. I have sold businesses in the past where the owner had all the knowledge in their head. Only they knew, especially, okay, I'm thinking of a bakery that I sold. This gentleman had owned the bakery for 50 years. He had all the recipes in his head, and he absolutely was not going to turn them over until the sale was final. That was a tough one, right? So we're not selling you. So as much of that you can work yourself out of, the better. Hand off as many responsibilities as you can to employees. And even once you do that, you want to cross-train your employees so that more than one person knows how to do every task. Um, then it's going to be much easier for a buyer to transition into the business and pick up the pieces of the business that they want to do, which may be totally different than what you've been doing. So, working yourself out of the job, training your employees and cross training. And then the third important thing you can do under this category is create a policy and procedures manual. That might sound old fashioned. I mean, you're welcome to do it online. My personal business, I have an online policy and procedure manual with a lot of screen share videos, but it is priceless. It actually becomes the buyer's Bible, and it's going to make it easier for them to feel confident that they can continue your business.
Yes, those are great tips, Teresa. And one of the things that I recommend or we recommend is to create a binder or a digital folder with a lot of these things that a future buyer would want. Some of the things that come to mind are a list of employees and their roles, vendor and supplier information, login credentials, marketing calendar, and you could explain, how resale is different from retail. We all know that there are some differentiators there, especially in the clothing line. Software and credit card information. I created this binder for my buyer, and it was very helpful. One of the things we didn't do though was the credit card information. We didn't start that process soon enough, and that took actually probably 6 to 8 weeks after closing to get that straightened out. I don't know why it took so long, but I was still I had to leave my bank account open while all those his sales were hitting my bank account, and it was kind of a mess. But that's one thing I did learn. And also, 80% of the tasks that an owner does are usually trainable. So think about what you do and what you could train one of your managers or staff people to do that. You need systems, people, and processes. It's not just a hustle. You need those in place, and your business should be organized, profitable, and transferable. You need to act like a CEO and not an employee.
Oh, that's good. That's exactly right. Okay, the last of these three things that buyers are usually focused in on is a transition plan. So you may not have thought of this, or this may come as a surprise or maybe a downer for you, but there's going to be a period of time where you're still going to have to be involved in the business, most likely after the sale, because somebody can't come in day one and just take it over. It's not like buying a house where you keys and off you go. So the sellers usually involved have an unstable internet. No? Oh, okay. Um, so the transition plan can be handled a variety of ways, like the seller can actually work in the business for a designated part of time, all the way down to just being accessible by phone. But that is a piece that will be negotiated during the contract negotiation. So just keep that in the back of your mind of what you would want ideally and how that might be handled. Transition is the real estate. You need to know what you're going to do with your real estate. If you own your real estate, are you going to continue to hold it and lease it to the buyer? Or are you going to sell it as part of this business sale? If you have a lease, how long is your lease? how will we transition the new buyer onto your lease? Some owners think because they've got a lease for another 3 years, they can't sell until that lease is over. That's necessarily true. Most leases that we deal with have the ability to transfer the lease if the business sells. And if it's not that sophisticated that it has that in there already, I do commercial real estate. So that's one of the things we bring to the table is we can help with that negotiation with your landlord. So think about the property. Think about how important the location is for a buyer. We usually don't recommend a buyer relocate right away because the location is part of the business that they're selling, and it's usually not a good idea to move. So we need to understand the real estate, and you need to understand what your options are for the new buyer. And then lastly, with this transition plan, we need to think about employees. Okay, you can't guarantee that your employees are going to leave or stay, but you probably have a good will. And you'll also want to think about when and how to tell key employees and how to tell that the business is either for sale or has sold. And Vina, you did a really good job with this when we sold yours.
Yes, and I think this is a very delicate thing to think about and decision to make because there's so many advisors will tell you different things. Many advisors will say, don't say anything to any employees until the very end. I elected to tell my key staff that it was for sale, and I elected to share my staff with the new buyer about 3 weeks before the sale closed because I knew it was really important to the buyer. He approached me several times about his concerns with staff leaving, and he was very anxious to meet my staff. So I arranged a meeting at our library. I rented one of the rooms there or used one of the rooms and had my staff there, and I was present. And we stayed for probably an hour or two while he asked questions, and I was pretty silent. I let him kind of run the meeting, and it worked out really well. I think my employees appreciated it and the buyer, but I didn't let that happen until I felt very, very confident that the sale was going to go through. And also, I might mention to back up to what Teresa was saying about the lease, don't feel like your lease is unchangeable. If you have some concerns about your lease and are afraid to take that next step, think about sitting down with your landlord or leasing agent and talk to them about your concerns because a lot of the times they can rewrite or do an addendum to your lease to change those terms so it's more beneficial for you. So I know we talked to a potential seller recently that had concerns because they were personally guaranteeing the lease, and some landlords may be willing to undo that or let you out with the sale. So, landlords want to continue to make money on that space. So it's going to be more beneficial to them too if they can work with you and not against you. So be open to that also.
Awesome. Thank you, Vina. Good points. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about understanding how business value is determined. You're probably all wondering how we come up with a suggested list price for your business. So let's demystify the valuation process. Vina sometimes says that Teresa works her magic on the numbers, but really all I do is use a giant Excel spreadsheet, right? The primary things I look at are your revenue minus your expenses, get your profit, right? Super simple formula. And we also look at your compensation, including any draws or personal items like we talked about in the beginning that you've charged to the business. And we come up with a number that's called seller's discretionary cash flow. So that's just revenue minus expenses, plus adding back the things that you're taking out and that's your seller's discretionary cash flow. Very simple. Then I do something called multiplying a factor. So maybe you've heard about factors. They're also called multiples. Sometimes people will spout, oh, the typical multiple for a business is X. There is no typical multiplier for a business. I'm a member of the business associations, and every year there's a release of what these factors should be for different industries. So I use a factor for resale shops. There's a factor specifically for resale shops. So it is based on what they're seeing resale shops sell for in today's current market, based on that seller's discretionary cash flow times the multiple. And right now, the multiples that I'm using can be anywhere between 0.67 and 3.33 times your seller's discretionary cash flow. So, how do we determine within there which factor to use? We've come up with a system where we look at all the intangibles of your business, how long you've been in business, um, your role as the owner. All of that either shifts the scale up toward the high end or down toward the low end, for your business. We also look at furniture, fixtures, and equipment as part of your value because you're selling that. It is the used value, but you are selling that. And any owned inventory that you have in your store. So that's how we do it. We add those things in after we do the factor. So again, let's talk a little bit more in depth about the factor. Things that would lower the factor, so you're more towards the bottom of that scale, would be if your sales are declining, which is one of the big reasons Vina mentioned earlier. Don't change the way you do business. Keep those sales up. Sometimes when people wait too long to start getting ready for the sales process, they're just tired. They just want out, and sales start to decline. That is the hardest time to sell your business. So you don't want to see declining sales. You don't want to see reliance on the owner. You want to hand off those tasks. Maybe you have a short lease term. That's not a good thing. So those things will shift you toward the lower part of the scale. Things that shift you toward the higher part would be like increasing sales, like year over year, sales are getting better and better. A large and engaged social media presence does get you a lot of value in today's buyer market. A large email customer list that you can reach out to, diversified suppliers, years of business, all the things that you probably know. If you think about it, those are going to be exciting to a buyer, and it's going to make your business worth more. So maybe there's a little bit of magic in it after all, because it's not just the spreadsheet, it's this subjective stuff toward the end, all the intangibles of this great business that you've built. Whoops.
Looks
There
like we
go.
have a couple questions also.
Okay.
Martha asked, what about the deposit on the lease? I assume that the current owner has put on with the lease.
Yeah, so I mean, that can be handled in a variety of ways, depending on what we do with the lease. So sometimes the landlord will prefer just to write a new lease with the new owner, and in that case, the deposit would go back to you. It would be just like you were moving out and somebody new was moving in. If they just transfer the lease over, then that money would get credited back to you or not, right? It's what we negotiate during the sale.
And
Anything
then
else?
Christina asked, does the landlord first have to do a research on the buyer before you can proceed? It may
Oh,
fall
yeah.
through.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So if somebody is going to transfer their lease and they're a landlord, and I've been a landlord before, they want to make sure that this new person is at least as good a credit risk as you were, right? And so they're going to look at their financials. They're going to evaluate them just like they would a new client. So they do have to qualify. Of course, they're buying their business, so they have to qualify for usually financing as well. So we find the buyers are usually a good credit risk when it comes to leasing.
And
Is that it?
then, no, questions keep coming in. Jill says, can the length being in business be a deterrent to a buyer? The the longer in biz. She said, I'm here 21 years. So
I,
yeah,
I have never seen a buyer think that was a negative. The longer you're in business, the better, right?
right. And then how do the accounts payable factor in? So that's something that is very negotiable. And what I did when I sold my business was I paid, well, every month my history was that I always paid all my consignment accounts that had a $50 or more balance. So all the accounts in my accounting were balances less than 50 each month at the beginning of each month. So when I sold my business, I negotiated to leave those smaller accounts in the system and the new buyer assume those liabilities. And how I sold that was that we don't want to send checks to all of those people with small accounts that are stale accounts, old accounts, because if we did mail out those checks, then that kind of disrupts the flow of the business. And we want everything just to keep smooth sailing just like it is. So, and I also explained that as we get expired inventory every day, because your items are, because we processed items almost on a daily basis, those expired items are 100% profit to the business. So any money that you have to pay out for those very small accounts was going to end up being a wash. And how I explained it, and it worked. So I did not have to write a check or pay him for all of those small accounts. So
Yeah, so the bottom line, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, I was done.
Okay, so the bottom line here that I think we're hearing in all of our answers is everything's negotiable. The sale, the transfer of the business has to work for both parties. So that is something that someone like us, whether you use us or a different business broker or do it yourself, that is the middle ground, right? Where it has to work for both parties to be a successful contract. Okay, what buyers look for, what we've been discussing, financial performance, and they also want to see steady growth potential, not just profits, but also predictability. And that is demonstrated through clean books. You want a business that runs without the owner. You want trained staff, written procedures, a lease that's transferable or renegotiable. Vina, what else is important?
Well, to answer Martha's question, Martha, I believe there is value to your mailing list. She says the guy on Facebook, supposedly a pro, says we can't really sell something we don't have. Inventory, since we are a consignment boutique, that it would be better to just close. But I told him, what about our client list? Is that worth something? So we do put value on your client list, and that's what buyers look for. They want a strong base of repeat customers because acquiring new customers is expensive and time consuming. And that offers opportunities for growth for a new owner.
Mm-hmm.
And customers are receptive to new products. A new owner may want to bring in new products. Maybe it's a clothing or a children's store or a furniture store, and the new owner wants to bring in fine jewelry or handbags, designer handbags. So that opportunity to use your current customer base is valuable. Also, they look for efficient and well-documented operations and processes. So this goes back to what Teresa touched on earlier about the procedure manual. Look at that, look it over and freshen it up. Do you have opening procedures, closing procedures? Is there a pricing guide? Maybe you could start even with a simple pricing guide. New buyers love those kind of things in place. Do you have payout procedures? On your intake procedures, do you need to tweak it? Or are they clear and consistent? Or your website and your signage in your store consistent and clear? Do you have a brochure that tells about that? I was at a conference one year and I visited a consignment shop, and I was so impressed when I got to their intake area. There was a brochure, and it was very simple. It just says, I'm a consigner, now what? And it went through and it listed everything that a consigner may have questions about. What happens to my expired inventory? How do I get paid? And so on and so forth. Maybe there was some how to check your account online, but there were a lot of good information there at their fingertips. So a new buyer would appreciate seeing something like that. Also, that a new buyers look for well-organized shop. Are your supplies organized? Are they in totes with labels? Trained and reliable team. I remember one of the things I worked on with my staff are scripts, and I would tape these scripts by all the phones in my shop, because you get phone calls. Say somebody calls and says, my mother-in-law passed away and I have all these clothes. What do I do with it? What do you want your staff to say to those people that call? So type it out, tape it by the phone, have a meeting with your staff. It's your job to train these staff to give the message that you need them to give. Also, new buyers look for opportunities to grow. So be thinking about that. There's so many ways that a new owner may see opportunities to grow. Maybe you could expand. Maybe there's space next to you. Maybe you could increase your item fees. You could add a new category. You could add live shows. All of those things, we like to gather that information and make a list and give to the buyer. It gets them excited because they're thinking of things, that they want to do if they would buy the business. Teresa? Oh, Teresa, are you there?
I'm there. I'm muted.
Oh,
Sorry.
there you go. Okay.
I didn't want to interrupt you, so I was on
Thank
mute.
you.
My apologies.
That's okay.
Okay, so let's talk in more detail about getting your financial records in order. What we do is we have you pull the financials that most any buyer is going to need to supply to their bank in order for the bank to give them financing to buy your business. And even if the buyer is using cash, they're likely going to ask for these same items because it's going to prove to them that the numbers that we've supplied them during the negotiation process are real. So here's what you need: 3 years of tax returns. Now, I know some of us are used to getting an extension every year and taking longer to do our taxes. If that is you, the year that you're going to put the business on the market, please go ahead and get your taxes done as soon as you can. Because here's what I see. I'll get 2 years of tax returns, and then I'll get a P&L for the current year. And the P&L varies from the tax returns because everybody's accountant makes adjustments when they fill out the tax return. So then I have inconsistencies that I'm explaining to buyers that would not be necessary if we had 3 apples to compare, right? But we have 2 apples and an orange in this case. So 3 years of tax returns. I mean, we can deal with it. If it's January, February, and you're ready to list, we can deal with it. But ideally, we want 3 years of tax returns. And then a year-to-date profit and loss. I would recommend doing a profit and loss, a P&L every month. So as soon as the month is over, getting a new one. And that's really important when you're listed because it shows that you're consistently, keeping the business going. They don't want to look at your 2024 taxes, buy it based on that without ever seeing a P&L, and then, oh, surprise, sales are way down this year. So they're going to ask for P&Ls every month as we go along. Your furniture, fixture, and equipment value, used value, you will need to do an inventory. Sometimes that is already on your taxes, the inventory of the things that you own. And you're going to want to think, you guys should be good at this because you're resale experts. What would somebody have to pay for this used? Or like if they were going to set up their store from scratch. So that's what we're looking for. What's going to transfer with the business? And then the value of your owned inventory, that's whether you buy it wholesale or whether it's expired, what the value of that is. Vina and I need to understand how your consignor payments are handled because, like we already touched on, that is always a point of negotiation. Who's going to take that? How's it going to be handled? And then, of course, lease details is another thing that I put here under financials. And that can be as simple as just pulling your lease and any amendments that you've assigned on your space. So this is a good exercise, even if you're far away from putting your listing on the market. Get these documents and start looking at them and understanding what's in them. It will be eye-opening for you, and you'll probably see some things you can clean up and even save yourself money right now.
Can I just touch on the FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment?
Yes.
What I did, this does not have to be fancy or even typed out. What I did, I just took a pad of paper and I walked through my store and I walked in the main room and I just started penciling out, okay, I've got 9 rounders. I've got 5 double straight racks. I've got a counter. I've got, and I just start listing. And then when you get down to the, finished with that, you could just estimate like office supplies, $1,000. I've got $1,000 worth of Christmas decorations out in the shed. So those are just, it can be very estimated, and obviously that's going to change, but don't leave anything out. Make sure you get all this stuff in your storage, your displays, your supplies at the register. Everything should be included because that's what you're selling to the new owner.
Right. So Vina, physical space.
Yeah, so all of you, I think, for the most part, have great presentations on your sales floor. That's what we focus on when we have our shops. But stand back and look at it from a buyer's perspective. Go from the parking lot, look at the entrance, make sure you've got that sidewalk swept, all those leaves up, fix anything that needs fixing in the look. Think of a first impression, because we do have potential buyers that we talk to that says, yeah, I've been going in, I think I know which shop this is, and I've been going in and just as a customer just to look around and think about it before they contact us. So they are watching. As soon as you list, there's going to be people coming in, whether we know it or not, or you know it or not. So think of that first impression, walk in with a customer's eyes. Are the racks too high? I like to walk into a store and be able to see a lot of space. So maybe you can lower those racks. Are your signage good and consistent? Do you have any sign displays or displays that needs fixed? Make sure the mirrors are clean and all that. So just get your physical space ready is all I would say about that.
Okay, so here's a very common question we get. How long will this take? How long does it take to sell a business? Well, probably longer than you would ideally want it to take, but everything that you do up front is only going to help it move faster. So let's walk through a typical timeline. The first thing, if you would contract with us or with anybody else that sells businesses, or even if you're going to do this on your own, the first thing you have to do is figure out what it's worth, what you can prove that your business is worth. And that's to do, we call it a BVA, business value assessment, the value, the listing price, whatever you want to call it, based on all those financials that we talked about earlier with the factor. That takes anywhere from 10 days to a month to get that figured out. It is a very complicated spreadsheet, a lot of questions, but well worth the time and money invested in that. The second thing you're going to do, oh, look, my slide has a mistake on it. List and marketing should be two different bullets. Second thing you're going to do is list it. So how do you list your business? We use a website called Biz by Sell. It's probably the largest one out there to list the businesses. And we also use social marketing a lot too. But listing your business is the second step. Usually takes about a week to a month to get all of that set up the way that is needed to set up. And then the big time period is marketing your business. So marketing your business, once you've got it listed, you get a ton of buyer leads, um, most of which are not qualified. So capturing those leads, answering the questions, reaching out, trying to get phone calls set up. Vina and I spend several hours a week just talking to buyers about businesses, seeing if they're qualified. Seeing if they are financially qualified. And also, a lot of people think it would be really cool to own a business, but you guys know you're a special breed. Not everybody can own a business, right? It's uncertain. There's no guarantees. And so it's not for everybody. So we spend a lot of our time having those conversations. That takes anywhere from 3 to 12 months before you're going to find that person who is the buyer for the business, who has everything that it takes to own and operate and finance the kind of business that you have. And then there could be these secret tours that Vina was talking about, where they go in and they are shoppers, all the way down to very, very serious buyers. We will suggest they actually get a backroom tour. And so all of that, 3 to 12 months usually. Then we have a stage where the buyer prepares a letter of intent, what we call an LOI. And that has like the high level terms of what they're willing to do, how much they're willing to offer, how long it's going to take them to get their financing, when and how they would like to take over, the transition plan, all of that. It's the high level details of that because that can be prepared by anybody. But when you get to the next step, which is the purchase agreement, that is done by an attorney, and that starts costing both parties money. So that LOI is sort of like, let's make sure we're in general agreement before we both spend money to have a purchase agreement going back and forth between attorneys. A business broker and a consultant, which is what Vina and I are consultants, and most anybody else you're going to use as a consultant. We are not attorneys. We are not allowed to write legal documents, so there will be an expense for that. So you get to the formal offer purchase agreement. There's back and forth between the attorneys. If you guys use attorneys, you know they're not the fastest. I always allow at least 60 days for that back and forth. Buyer financing can take up to 6 months, and a lot of time the purchase is contingent on the financing. SBA can definitely take up to 6 months. So you have to allow for that. And then you have closing, and then you have the transition plan. So all in all, that's why we recommend that 12 to 24 months before you want to walk away, because all of these steps have to be done. And anything you do up front is just going to make it faster and less painful. But those are the steps.
One of the things I also did besides those, and before I put my business up for sale, I hired a videographer to kind of tell my story. I wasn't sure at that point whether I was going to go public with selling the shop. I eventually did, but I think that was really, I'm happy I did that, let's just say. And he came to my store one day when it was closed, and we set up like one of those, director's chairs in front of the cash register area, and you could see the shop in the background. But he was very thorough and asked me a lot of questions, and he did a great job in splicing and making it my story from the very beginning to the point I wanted to sell. And I had him have two different endings. He gave me two versions, and one ending just told my story that I was going to put on my website, and the other ending was the fact that I wanted to slow down and retire, and for those reasons, the business is for sale. So we actually ended up posting that video on Biz Buy Sell, and I think it was very beneficial because there was a lot of good information in there and showed the history of the business. So you might think about that. You don't have to hire a expensive videographer. I think mine was maybe around $1,500, $2,000 in that range. But you could probably call your local college and find somebody that's less amount, or you may even know somebody. So I think that helped me, find a buyer for mine. We have a couple questions. Linda says, I have two different businesses in the same store. Vintage that I sell and theatrical costumes that I rent out to the general public and the movie industry. Should I split them up? Teresa?
Well, I guess my first question would be, are they split on your tax returns? Because if they are, then it's easy to sell them separately. If they're all on one tax return, it's a bear. I've done it before, but it requires the bookkeeper and or accountant to go back through and take it all apart so that it can be valued separately and sold separately. So
Yeah,
it's
Linda
possible.
Linda says they're not split up on
Yeah.
paperwork, I don't think.
Yeah, it would be much easier to sell it as one business, but I mean, if you have two buyers, it can be done. It can be split.
Yeah, so my business actually sort of like that. I had two businesses. I had Selective Seconds and Selective Closeouts that I had started, but it was one tax return. And I asked a certain amount for one business or a certain amount for both businesses. So that's what I did. And the buyer wanted both businesses. So anything's negotiable, like Teresa said earlier. And then Emily asked, do you have the BVA? Do you do the BVA in-house, or is that done from an outside evaluator?
So our BVAs are done by me, and I am not an official valuator, business valuator, which is sort of like the difference between me giving an opinion on a piece of real estate versus getting an appraisal. It's sort of the same thing. We're much less expensive than a valuation, but you can definitely have a real valuation done. It's several $1,000s the last time I checked, but it can be done.
But we think we're just as good.
Oh, I don't know that I'm making that guarantee.
I think we are. I think we're pretty accurate. Sarah said, okay, Carmen says, will this video seminar be available to watch? Yes, I believe everybody that signed up will get a link to it, and I think it's going to be on YouTube also. Sarah says, I'm concerned about finding the same buyer for my biz and building. I'm not sure I want to continue to be a landlord.
Okay, so there would be a couple of different ways to handle that. If you got a business buyer who couldn't afford the real estate, which is pretty common, you could always just put them in there under a lease and then sell that building as an investment if you didn't want to hold it long term, or you could hold out for a buyer who could afford both. So you have options, and it can be marketed both ways.
So let's recap what we've talked about today. Covered a lot in this. How long we've been on here? Almost an hour, about 50 minutes. We've talked about how to set yourself up for a future sale on your terms, understanding how your business value is determined, what buyers look for, getting your financial records in order, getting your physical space ready for sale, and the process of selling a business and how long it takes. And then also the emotions of selling your business. I just want to take a minute to talk about this because this is something I was not prepared for. I was so excited about slowing down. You know, my husband was retired. My mother was in her 80s, and I was thinking, you know, I want to do more things with her. And I wanted to garden, I wanted to cook. There was just so many things I was excited about focusing my thoughts and energy in. And I wasn't prepared for all the emotions through the sale, and even that I experienced now. It's been a little over a year now, but these are real emotions. First you get, and I think they're pretty accurate in in order of how I experienced them anyway. You get excited and anticipation, you start second guessing yourself, you go through fear and uncertainty, you feel a sense of loss and grief. I mean, this is part of your identity that's no longer there. It's no longer yours. So you've got to kind of figure that part out. You start having regret or doubt, or you may, I'm not saying you're going to do all these, but you may experience some regret or doubt. I did. I don't now, but you know, it did creep in there a little bit. And then the last one is contentment and acceptance. And it's a good feeling when you finally get to that part. And it's been a long journey for me and a very satisfying journey. And I'm just so glad that Teresa and I are able to help other people through this process and kind of prepare, because, you know, I didn't have anybody to tell me all this from the very beginning. So Teresa and I, you know, teamed up after I sold mine, because we started getting calls from other shop owners, you know, how can we help, can Teresa help them? And, you know, with my knowledge and her experience, we said, you know what, maybe we should partner up. So that's kind of how we started Small Biz Exit. And it's been fun and exciting so far. So I don't know, do we want to open it up to questions, Teresa?
Yeah, I'm just going to leave these questions up while we do that. Questions for you to consider either now or, you know, this evening when you're thinking about it or whatever. You can shoot a photo of this slide. Just kind of think through these as we're talking about the emotions of the sale and the hard facts about what needs to happen. So yeah, we can take some questions in the chat. I think we have 7 minutes left. And then I do have another slide that I'll throw up that has a QR code to our website. If you want to reach out to us, we would love to answer, you know, additional questions that we don't get to today.
Any tips on announcing the sale to customers and consignor, timing wise? Rachel, that's a tough one, because, you know, I believe in your gut. You know, you just got to kind of follow your gut, but you want to be very cautious when thinking and deciding this, because you definitely do risk other people finding out and what they do with that information and how they process it. So I would definitely err on the pause button on that until you really think that through and are ready to announce it. And I went live in my business, Selective Seconds. I said I had a, you know, big announcement, and I did that because, for one, the process was taking longer than I wanted before I went public, and I wanted to speed up that process. And I believed I could do it in a way where I could tell my customers that nothing was going to change, that I was going to be around to make sure that the business continued on as it had been for 27 years. And I actually owned the building too, so I had a vested interest in the success with the new owner to make sure it carried on. And I know a lot of you don't have that, but you can still talk to your customers and consignors and suppliers. I think if you do go public, I think it's really important that you be present and not, you know, let them worry about you leaving. You know, you need to be present and talk to them often, and And
Yeah, and little bit more information on that. Before we release any kind of details, we do have a confidentiality agreement that a buyer has to sign. I do have a buyer information sheet that I have them complete so that you know who this person is. And as the seller, you get to approve those things. So, and sometimes you might approve it and we still don't release the name. It's just all up to you when to give that information. I will tell you, almost everybody starts out with not being public, and by the end, they're usually very comfortable. So it's a process. So it's okay to start out very private and maybe you never become public. But a lot of our owners do kind of ease into it. But we also try to cover the bases by having the confidentiality agreements. We've also had, like Vina mentioned earlier, we've had people figure out who it is. I mean, large furniture consignment store, in this area, well, there's only a handful. So people can figure it out. So also keep that in mind. There's nothing we can do to keep them from figuring out who it might be.
yeah, after the sale, Rachel's just asked after the sale question mark. So, that's all negotiable. Depends on the seller, how much time they're willing to give the new owner. In my case, I think we wrote the contract that I would be available to train, I want to say 80 hours. But honestly, I had kind of worked myself out of the job. So my staff was pretty much running the shop, and the new owner preferred the staff train him. And he would call me with questions, and it worked that way. I went in a few times, but for the most part, my staff trained him, and then I kind of just watched, and I made a lot of suggestions when I saw marketing or something that I thought he needed to know. I would email him and talk to him about that. So I think I had a really good experience with my buyer and still have a good relationship with him. So it's been a really good process that I went through. So I hope that, we're able to help you guys make that process, and we're available. My email is vinasmallbizexit@gmail.com. No periods or dashes. And Teresa put up the QR code there, and her email, yeah, it's right. Both of our emails are right there on the screen. So feel free to reach out. We can answer any questions. And we are usually booked up a week or 10 days in advance. So just be prepared to be, it may not be immediately when we can do our free consultation with you. We do offer a free first-time consultation with you, and it's a video chat like this, and we have a list of a lot of questions that we ask you so we can better understand your business and your goals. So we want to see if we can help you with that. But, we're fairly new. We've been in business about a year. And so we're learning as we're going, but we think we're really dialing in on what you need as resale shop owners. And we want to offer a good service for you guys. So any feedback is greatly appreciated, or any needs. We would love that so we can continue to improve and offer great services for you guys.
All right.